Hi, this is Amanda Phillips with my Module 2 demonstration, Design of a Learning Experience. I'm using Screencast-O-Matic for this, and that does 15-minute chunks, so please bear with me. I'm going to try to do them in concise 15-minute segments and try to pace it out so I'm not breaking in the middle of something. To start with, determine the learning outcome. When we think about learning goals in general, we think about a goal set with the teacher that every student must meet. With UDL, learning goals look, feel, and sound a little different than how we traditionally think of them. Goals move beyond their traditional role and support development of expert lifelong learners that are strategic, collaborative, and motivated. The UDL approach to the learning goals has 3 ports that support learners: addressing learner variability, how they learn; choice for showing understanding, getting rid of that one-size-fits-all; and options in materials, methods, and assessments. This supports learners because it respects them as individual thinkers, encourages creativity and flexibility, and allows children to think differently than their peers. Learning goals, when written appropriately, are geared towards growth, so on the other hand, they can sometimes restrict learners when they're not giving choice. Asking all students to show depth of understanding and application in the same way would restrict how they best think, comprehend, access, perform, and display their understanding. Flexible learning goals are goals that are flexible. They're able to be changed for each student. Having a flexible classroom and learning environment means that the classroom, materials, instruction, and goals can change to meet the needs of the students. So although all students are learning about time in a 3rd grade measurement unit, not all students would be doing the same thing, so not all students would have the same immediate learning goal. They are flexible and change as the student's understanding changes. It's responsive, it's appropriate, it's supportive, and it's what's right to ensure that all children are successful. For this activity, for designing a learning experience, I chose to look at a Common Core math standard for grade 3, which is tell and write time to the nearest minute and measure time intervals in minutes. Solve word problems involving addition and subtraction of time intervals in minutes, for example, representing the problem on a number line diagram. Once I identified the Common Core learning standard that I was going to focus on for my experience, then I was able to start asking myself what content, knowledge, and skills are at the center of this standard. So it had me thinking about what they might have previously learned, what else they've learned in 3rd grade, and everything that's connected to that. So the content, knowledge, and skills that are at the center of this standard include telling time on a digital and analog clock, understanding relationship between seconds to minutes, minutes to hours, hours to days, transitions from AM to PM, logical understanding of time, so thinking about like what takes about a minute, what takes about 30 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, 7 hours, just to get them connecting it to their life and thinking logically, identifying how long we're at school or in math class, at soccer practice, sleeping, etc., so they can start to build those relationships. They'll also need to write time using a colon to separate hour and minutes, label AM or PM, and identifying why does telling time matter, when do we see time and use time, when does this happen in school or outside of school. Telling time includes fractions, looking at a clock split up into equal parts, half of an hour, and seeing a clock in parts that make up a whole. Other skills include skip counting by 5s, like the minutes around the clock, movement of the hands as time progresses and the relationship between the second, minute, and hour hand, and then also, like I previously said, analog and digital clocks. So when I'm thinking about creating a learning outcome, setting goals, a SMART goal, goals that I'll be able to communicate with students, I want to make sure that I pick a flexible verb, something like create, solve, represent. So I chose to have them create, solve, and represent real-life problems involving elapsed time. This could look like writing a word problem. These are just examples of what it could be. Illustrating a problem, like a comic or scene, recording a real-life problem using audio, creating a digital representation of a real-life problem, using pictures, text, Google Slides, representing then how they solved it. So whether that's using manipulatives like a Judy clock or showing it on a number line, using the algorithm for adding and subtracting minutes and hours, just logical thinking. A lot of kids are able to count on or deduct, and also represent using words and numbers, pictures, or fractions. So my SMART goal that I came up with, specific, measurable, attainable, and result-oriented, time-bound, and driven by learner needs, was that grade 3 mathematicians will create, solve, and represent real-life examples involving time intervals and elapsed time during the 4-week measurement unit. Each student or group of students will demonstrate their understanding of time intervals and elapsed time as measured by a teacher-created rubric, self-assessment, and reflection. I think I would communicate this through a classroom goal that could be shared as mathematicians will create, solve, and represent real-life problems using time intervals and elapsed time to show activities during a day. So that would be the goal that I would maybe display or share with my students and use as a conversation piece. I think it's showing more kid-friendly language and something that they would be able to digest. I would use that SMART goal for me as the teacher and then put it into friendly language for the design of a learning experience. Students will be able to is a strategy that I used a lot at one of my previous schools. We had to record our students will be able to blank in order to blank so they can blank. And we actually had to write these on the board daily for every subject. And what kind of seemed tedious at the time, now looking at it through a UDL lens, really makes sense because the students know what they're doing, know the purpose, and know what they'll be able to do with it or how they can apply it. So if this was something that I was going to share on the board for a group of 3rd grade students, I would write it in this language. Students will be able to determine time intervals and elapsed time in order to effectively plan events and activities for a day so they can manage time wisely and accomplish all they would like to do. All right. Key objectives that would come from this learning experience, or my objectives when I'm thinking about the learning experience, and that kind of springboard my thoughts into determining their learning paths, are listed on this screen. So I wrote them in language that I would be able to share with individual students or groups of students. So if we're setting goals together, these might be some of the goals that I would anticipate having a learning path for, and also help children almost use them as sentence stems that they could then manipulate based on their needs and what they want to accomplish. So some examples, mathematicians can identify and convert minutes to hours, hours to minutes, share reasonable examples of elapsed time using different strategies, think logically about time and activities to complete in a time, identify and describe the relationship between different measurements of time, not just having it in their minds as seconds and minutes, but even moving to months, years, and seasons, create examples of timed activities, and then how they show that in different ways, answer questions, showing depth of understanding, connecting to their work, and showing critical thinking skills. And also, I don't want to forget to include in objectives and goal setting with kids is that I want them to be deep thinkers, not only of their own work, but of others' work. So being able to ask questions respectfully, request for clarification, and be able to draw connections between their work and the work of others. Moving on to assessments, they can support or inhibit different learners in demonstrating their knowledge and skills with regard to learning outcomes that I just shared and talked about. Assessments that are flexible and open to creativity and critical thinking, and those that allow for choice, support learners in meeting the goals that they set. Assessments are no longer bubble in this multiple choice answer, but they can be tasks that are connected to students' interests, strengths, and allow children to show their understanding in a way that is appropriate for their learning. Students will show more depth and analysis for their learning goal if we give them that opportunity to be flexible. For example, when asking students what the main idea of a novel is, and if you want them to provide supporting details, student A might want to write a paragraph. Student B might create an audio file or tell you in a face-to-face conference. Student C might create a visual and explain it to you in words, writing, captions, or labels. Student D might create a video or act it out with a partner. Maybe they want to use pictures, media, or props to bring in the dramatic side. But all of the students would need to be able to clearly state what the main idea is and show evidence from the text. It might look different, but they'll all be able to show the learning goal being met. A time when assessments could inhibit different learners could be, with using the same example that I just shared, asking all students to write a paragraph. It really comes back to and depends on what the goal is. Is the goal to write a paragraph, or is the goal to tell the main idea and provide supporting details? If it's writing a paragraph, the assessment could change to be writing a paragraph on a topic of their interest, which would get them more engaged. But if the goal is to tell the main idea and supporting details, then forcing them to write a paragraph or requesting that of them would inhibit some and negatively impact their learning outcome. It's important to remember that everything comes back to these learning goals, objectives, and our hopeful outcomes. So I designed a learning experience, and one of the ways to assess their understanding is through an activity that I would call the best day ever. So I'm going to be explaining that through this module demonstration, but in summary, the assessment activity would be a performance task that asks students to create a schedule for their best day ever. So this will include picking activities and locations, calculating elapsed time for transitions or transportation, and the length of different events that they choose. They'll be converting time, planning, organizing ideas, and then sharing them with a group and other classes or other grade level peers in a way of their choosing. And then they would be assessed using a self-reflection, as well as they would have access to a rubric that I would create so they would understand the expectations. So now that I have determined the learning outcomes, looked at key objectives and potential learning paths, thought of the performance assessment that I would be using and how I would assess, it is time to start thinking about a variability perspective. Based on the learning outcomes and key objectives, analyzing the learner variability that needs to be next considered. What areas of knowledge and skills will be demonstrated and what implications would they have? So learner variability means that all individuals are unique in how they learn. Each learner brings a different profile to the classroom or work environment, etc. And UDL addresses learner variability by asking that teachers embrace this idea as a positive when thinking about their class and curriculum. Starting from a place of acceptance and celebration of learner variability will allow us, the teachers, to use UDL principles, guidelines, and checkpoints to design ways for all students to be engaged, understand learning goals and standards, and respond to show their thinking in more meaningful ways.